I'm not going to insult your intelligence by explaining what an iceberg is. They've been all over YouTube for years at this point, and if you've never watched one, you've probably been living under a rock. I will, however, insult your intelligence by telling you what a JRPG is, a role-playing game from Japan. These games are typically very story-heavy, with the player focusing on leveling up, forming a party that usually consists of 4 characters at any given time, and collecting the best gear available for each party member. Turn-based combat is also a staple of the genre. This iceberg was created by user AshleyWinchesters from Reddit, though I did make some editorial changes. Now that we got all that out of the way, let's get started. Starting off the first tier of this iceberg, we have Pokemon. If you clicked on this video, there is a 100% chance that you know what Pokemon is. Known as pocket monsters in Japan, in this franchise, you battle with creatures that you store in your balls and carry around to catch other creatures. A big priority and selling point of the Pokemon games is to catch them all. For being the most profitable intellectual property of all time, one would hope that they start putting effort into the games they release instead of churning out slop like they have been. I could sit here for hours and go on and on about the history of Pokemon and how important it is, but we all already know that stuff, so let's just move on to the second entry. Kingdom Hearts. In 2002, Square teamed up with Disney for one of the biggest crossovers in gaming history, combining Final Fantasy and Disney characters. Kingdom Hearts ditched the turn-based combat traditional to Final Fantasy games, in favor of a hack-and-slash style of gameplay, where Donald and Goofy team up with this kid in enormous shoes. The franchise has been a massive success, and there have been several sequels, and because of that, the story has become incredibly convoluted. Kingdom Hearts fans explain the plot difficulty level impossible. Fire Emblem. This iceberg had Fire Emblem split into 3 parts across multiple tiers, but I decided that I'm just going to knock it all out here. The first tactical role-playing franchise on this iceberg, Fire Emblem released in Japan in 1990 on NES. In these games, the player meets and adds characters to their party who are moved similar to that of pieces on a chessboard. Even though Fire Emblem is now one of the biggest JRPG franchises, the first appearance of Fire Emblem for the United States was in Super Smash Bros. In 2001, with the characters Marth and Roy on the roster. The game's director cites this along with the success of the similarly turn-based game Advance Wars as the reason for finally bringing Fire Emblem over to us dirty Westerners. We are not worthy. Xenoblade. Xenoblade Chronicles was never supposed to make it outside of Japan. It was through Operation Rainfall that Xenoblade Chronicles, The Last Story, and Pandora's Tower ever found its way into the hands of people in the West. Operation Rainfall was a grassroots fan campaign to put pressure on Nintendo to finally give us some decent Wii games, and they succeeded. Now Xenoblade Chronicles is one of the most well-known JRPGs in America, even with a port to the new Nintendo 3DS, which is very impressive. Final Fantasy. I was debating not even including this one, but since I did Pokemon, I guess I'll speak on it. Probably the most well-known JRPG franchise of all time. At the time of recording, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is just released to great success, which is a remake of the game that many consider to be one of, if not the best game of all time. Final Fantasy VII is what really put the series and JRPGs as a whole on the map. Dragon Quest, released in 1986. It took much inspiration from fantasy elements in games from the West. It was known as Dragon Warrior in North America until 2005. There was a guy that you may have heard of, Akira Toriyama, rest his soul, who was commissioned to create art for the game to set it apart from other RPGs at the time. Many people doubted that a fantasy series with swords and dungeons instead of science fiction elements would become popular in Japan. However, this series has become very popular there, and in the West. Earthbound. Earthbound is part of the Mother series of games. Set in Eagle Land, it's a parody of what people in Japan think the United States is like. The game being created through that lens truly makes an interesting experience, and the gameplay itself is great. It's just a fun, goofy time, until the end of the game anyway. I, along with many other people, think it's strange and annoying how they decided to release the second game in the series in the West with no intention of releasing the first game until a million years later, but whatever. If you've never played Earthbound, I highly recommend it. Mario and Luigi. It's Mario. How could it not sell? In the Mario and Luigi games, you control both characters simultaneously. You can switch between Mario and Luigi with the other brother following behind. Similar to prior Mario RPGs, like Paper Mario and Super Mario RPG, Players can time button presses to make their attacks do more damage, and even use the same method to dodge and deal counter damage. The development company, Alpha Dream, who is responsible for Mario and Luigi, just worked on Hamtaro Rainbow Rescue for the Game Boy Advance. I would have liked to have been in the room when the higher-ups from Nintendo came in and gave them that task, but they did a great job. Such a great job, in fact, that they went on to develop 6 more Mario and Luigi games, and even Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games 2020. Persona. I'm saving the best for last. My own personal favorite franchise on this iceberg. I have several videos already talking about Persona. It's the reason I even make content. I could sit here and talk about it all day, but I'll keep it brief. Originally a spin-off from the Shin Megami Tensei series of games, the first 2 Persona games were closer to mainline SMT, but Persona 3 is where it really started to form its own identity, with the calendar system and social links. The series saw massive success with Persona 5 and is now one of the biggest players in the JRPG space. I had to do a fresh install of Windows on my PC because I was having a lot of problems, so I lost all my files, all my settings, everything is gone. So if I sound different, that's why. I tried to get it as close as possible to what it was. I don't want to mess with your guys' autism too much, because I know how you JRPG players are.
I have AUT, ISM, I have AUT, ISM, autism.
But let's get started with Tier 2, Chrono Trigger, one of the most beloved RPGs on the Super Nintendo. The development team included 3 designers that Square dubbed the Dream Team, and they weren't far off. Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of the Final Fantasy series, Yuji Horii, creator of the Dragon Quest series, and the legend Akira Toriyama. The plot of the game centers around a group of adventurers who travel through time to prevent the world from being destroyed. One of my own personal favorites, with an incredible soundtrack and visuals for the time. Chrono Trigger really pushed the Super Nintendo to its limits. It should be considered a crime to have never played this game. The Tales series. Tales of this, tales of that. If they ever run out of stuff to tell tales of, hell has frozen over. The first game was released in 1995 with Tales of Fantasia, and was followed up by 16 more games, with the most recent being Tales of Arise, breaking the 5-year gap since Tales of Berseria was released. Though it's considered a niche series in the West, it is one of the most important JRPG franchises in Japan. The series started gaining popularity in the West with the release of Tales of Symphonia for the GameCube. The World Ends With You, an action role-playing game developed by Square Enix and Jupiter, released in 2007, exclusive to the Nintendo DS. When I first saw this game back in the day, I thought it was just another Kingdom Hearts game, which makes sense because the development was inspired by Jupiter's previous handheld game, Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories. The World Ends With You has an art style that was inspired by Shibuya's youth culture at the time. In 2018, The World Ends With You Final Mix was released for the Switch, which is the definitive way to play the game. Disgaea. The literal translation for the game's name in Japan is Hell Chronicles Disgaea, a tactical role-playing game similar to that of Fire Emblem mentioned in the first tier. Disgaea was first released in Japan in January of 2003. Each Disgaea game consists of a number of missions that the player undertakes from a central hub. From there, the player can manage equipment, team members, heal, and more. When the player is prepared, they can then travel to the next available mission. Missions are usually arranged in a number of chapters with cutscenes before and after to advance the plot. Secret of Mana. Released in 1993 and developed and published by Square for the Super Nintendo. Rather than using a turn-based system, Secret of Mana features real-time battles with the power bar mechanic. There's a unique ring command menu which pauses the action and allows the player to make decisions mid-battle. A second and third player can also drop in and out of the game at any time to help you during your playthrough. Bravely Default. One of the newer franchises on the list, first being released in 2012, Bravely Default was developed by Silicon Studios for the Nintendo 3DS. The game is set in a world which is kept in balance by 4 elemental crystals that are protected by a religious group with influence across the world. The 4 protagonists aim to reclaim the 4 crystals from darkness and confront a greater evil along the way. I really feel like I've heard this somewhere before. Golden Sun. The first 2 Golden Sun games were released in 2001 and 2002 for the Game Boy Advance. Golden Sun's story follows a band of magic-attuned teenagers called Adepts on a mission to protect the world of Wayard from alchemy, a potentially destructive power that was sealed away long ago. During their quest, the adepts develop new magic abilities called synergy, assist others, and learn more about why alchemy was sealed away. Ni no Kuni. Many people don't know this, but Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch is an enhanced version of the original DS game released only in Japan with an extended ending. The DS game and Wrath of the White Witch were actually in development at the same time. You can tell just by looking at it, but the game's art style was influenced by Studio Ghibli, and the animated sequences were even produced by Legend of Heroes. First starting as a part of the Dragon Slayer series in the 1980s, the series evolved into its own decade-spanning, interconnected series with 17 entries, including several sub-series. All games in the franchise released since 2004 are part of the Trails sub-series known as Kiseki in Japan. The most recent entry, The Legend of Heroes Kai no Kiseki, was released in 2024.